Genetically Modified Organisms, or GMOs, have their DNA artificially modified by humans. Using modern genetic manipulation techniques by changing the DNA, so changing the genome of an organism means we can change the characteristics.
Humans have been artificially altering the genomes of plants and animals for thousands of years by selective breeding. Today, with advances in genetic engineering techniques, we can speed this process up by incorporating specific new genomes from one species into a completely unrelated species.
When I asked them why Health Canada does not conduct any independent studies prior to or after approval, they said that it is too costly and that it should be the corporation's responsibility to do the testing on their own products. The GM apple has recently been approved for the US FDA, and the majority of Canadians, including farmers, do not want this to become a reality.
Genetically modified organisms have had their own amount of controversy. Sometimes the same enterprises working with GMO have a suspicious reputation related with toxic products and risking humans' health by using poison substances. Due to being against these big companies behind the science business or to the concept in itself, people have been outspoken about their opinions and how they don't agree with the road the world is taking. Sometimes people are just marching, demanding a label on the products they are buying, claiming their rights to know what they're eating, which is fair enough.
There's so much fake news out there about GM crops, and scientists need to really stand up to address that fake news, because many scientists just went into their shells and stopped talking about how great the new biotechnologies can be for food security and agricultural sustainability.
GMO and the science around it have huge potential. The sky is the limit when it comes to what GMO can do. The only limit, the only thing that can stop us, is our own imagination. If it's possible to create plants that can make their own pesticides, plants that are able to resist herbicides, what else can be done? We know how important GMO will be in the long run, especially when you consider that the worldwide population is growing at a rapid pace. Disease can be eradicated if we use GMO, and it's not just humanity will be helping. The environment can also benefit from this. There will be a smaller use of pesticides, and there might even be trees that can actually reverse the effect of climate change. The possibilities are endless.
Good morning, Professor.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Sorry to keep you all up so late.
Oh, there's no problem.
No problem.
Okay,
Good.
I would like to start just by thanking the professor for accepting our invitation and for being here with us. It is a pleasure to finally be able to talk to you. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Maria. I'm 17 years old. I'm in 12th grade and I'm a visual arts student. I'll let my friends introduce themselves.
Okay, thanks, Maria.
Hi, I'm Tiago. I'm 16 years old and I'm a science and technology student.
Hi,
Nice
I'm
to meet you.
Marta.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Marta. I'm 17 years old. I'm a 12th grade student and I'm in science and technologies.
Okay.
And I am Rita, I am 17 years old, I am a 12th grade student and I am in science and technology.
Okay, nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too.
Professor. Before we start, I just wanted to say, the book, the school gave the book to me last Friday.
Okay.
I did not have time to read it, but I can to
No,
wait.
of course not.
So yes, I guess we can start.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
I'll pass my word to Tiago.
Well, I have the first question. Professor, what is your belief about GMO?
Well, we've been, not just in plants and animals, but also in medicine, we've been using GMOs now since the 1980s, so from well before you were born, and a lot of our medicines, for example, involve the use of GMOs. So, for example, all of the vaccines that are currently coming out for COVID-19, all of them have been produced using genetically modified organisms, and some of them with recombinant RNA. They are themselves genetically modified pieces of nucleic acid. So, in terms of my specialty area, of course, is crops. And I think that most of the crop plants that have come out with some sort of GM technology have delivered really good benefits. And a lot of those benefits have actually been to improve the environmental outcomes of those crops.
How did the professor know you wanted to work with GMO?
That's a really good question. So I did a degree in agricultural science. And then I started my PhD. So I started my PhD, my doctorate, in 1984. And I was in my first year of my doctorate working on plant genetics. And all these interesting papers started coming out firstly from Belgium, then the US, and then Germany, where people had made the first genetically modified plants. And I thought, that's what I want to do, but there was no one in Australia who had the technology at that time. And when I was finishing my PhD in 1987, I applied to go and work in various laboratories in Europe, all of whom were doing work on genetically modified plants. And I ended up getting an interview. My first interview was at the University of Birmingham in the UK. And they offered me a job, and I took it, and that's where I learned to do the whole technique. It was at the time in the 1980s. It was really exciting to all the plant scientists, especially the plant scientists who were interested in improving plants. And for a lot of us, the reason why we got into it was we thought, okay, we can make insect-resistant plants, we can make disease-resistant plants, we can make plants that produce healthier foods, and all of these involve less inputs. We don't need to spray the plants with insecticide, we don't need to spray with fungicide, and if the food that we produce from it is better for people, I suppose, we were naive because we were just scientists thinking of this as being, this is going to be fantastic for everyone. And it was, and it was exciting for 4 or 5 years, and then it started to go a little bad, let's put it that way, because various people were against it. But that's, so sorry, I probably answered a few other things there, but that was why I decided to get into it.
Okay. Considering what the professor and your team work on, how does a usual day of work plays out?
So we've most of our work is in laboratories. So we have a laboratory at the University of Queensland. We also have a lot of we call them glass houses. Maybe a lot of other people call them greenhouses, where we do a lot of our experiments. And then when we have plants that have particular qualities, we grow them in the field, and we have to, for the experimentation of GMOs, we have to get permission from the federal government, from the Australian government, and they tell us how we need to grow them. So at the moment, we've got one trial in the field at a university site 80 kilometres west of here, and in the next week we're planning 2 more at 2 other different sites. And these are cereals. That's actually sorghum. Maybe in Portuguese it's called sorgo. I'm not exactly sure about what you would call it, but it's mainly grown here as an animal feed, and we export a lot to China and Japan and Korea. And what we've been doing is improving the digestibility for humans and animals, and also increasing the protein content. So the normal sorghum has 10% protein, and we've got sorghum now that has 16 or 17% protein. And we're growing them in the field. We have to grow them in the field to make sure that the higher protein doesn't have any adverse effects, like lower yield, or does it attract more predators or birds or anything like that. So
thank you.
We can have times when we're in the field. We can have times when we're in the glasshouse. Most of the time we're in the lab. But of course, because we're modern scientists, unfortunately, a lot of the time we spend in front of a computer.
What's the biggest obstacle that exists between the goals of scientists such as you and the people against GMO? And how do you handle working on a topic which is a source of such controversy?
Yeah, that's, again, like all of your questions, another fantastic question. I guess the thing that has become evident to me is, for a lot of people in the general public, they haven't actually given very much thought to GM crops, foods, or anything like that. And they hear that it's bad from someone, and then they decide, okay, it must be bad. In the same way that we do these things ourselves about everything. If I read the online news and it's something I know about, I sometimes think, yeah, I don't think that's right. But if it's something I don't know anything about, I think, oh wow, okay, that's terrible, So the thing that I know is that when you talk to a lot of people, or do a video presentation, or give them something to read that explains some of the benefits, a lot of people think, oh, so actually, they're not necessarily all bad. And then a lot of people think, okay, that's fine. But you've got a certain number of people who, and in Australia, there was a guy called Craig Cormack who did a lot of research on this. And there's 20% of people in Australia, and it's probably similar in most other places, who just don't accept it. They say, no, they're bad, it's terrible, it's not natural. And we have exactly the same thing amongst the general populace when it comes to anything. For example, that there's people who think, okay, a vaccine is terrible. It's the same sort of thing. They don't think about the science, but there is something emotional. And I do know from the sort of questions I got, not so much now, but in the past, it was all about, oh, but this is because major corporations will control our food if we only grow GM crops. And that was, so a lot of people weren't against the technology, they were more against big multinational companies, which is a very different argument. But, if you're against big multinational companies, you might as well be us.
It's a
because that's who makes cars.
It's a pretty interesting fight because both societies are fighting for the same thing. They are both fighting for food security, for food that's good enough to eat.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And you know, and again, individuals all have particular things that they do and don't like. My grandson, who is only 6 months ago, he didn't eat vegetables. He only ate meat. And he eats vegetables on the floor. Now he only eats vegetables and he won't eat meat. He's 2.5. You know, the level of rational thinking behind that is who knows, but it's I don't like it, and then he throws it on the floor. And we're all like that with everything. You know, there's always something that we don't like, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're rational in thinking about whether we like it or not.
The reference to companies kind of follows up on the next question. I was heard in a documentary while searching about this theme, this sentence. It is the first time that the farmer is not in control of the seed. With that said, what do you think about the role that companies that work or sell GMOs have in this business?
Yeah, well, obviously companies are in it because there's profit to be made, big profit. However, most of the companies who are doing it prior to GM were producing hybrid seed, and hybrid seed involves you cross two parents, you get what we call an F1, and that's what the farmer grows. But if they keep the seed, they'll get segregation in the next generation, where it'll change the height, it'll change the flowering date, it'll be non-uniform. And so those hybrids first started coming out in 1930. And so in a lot of the major crops, the farmers didn't have control over the seed anyway. The other thing that I'd say is we're, at least in Australia, and I'm fairly certain it's probably similar in much of Europe, most farmers don't keep the seed that they've grown. They will be more likely to buy it again next year because the seed quality that they buy from professional companies is much higher seed quality. They will get better crops from the quality of the seed. And for reasons, for example, like if you've grown your own wheat or barley and it rains during the grain fill period, that seed will always have a certain amount of fungus on it. If you then plant that seed, you will get big problems with the germination and the establishment of the field trial. So when you're so farmers these days, they know in their mind that, okay, I want to have 100,000 plants per hectare. So they plant for 100,000 plants per hectare. If only half of them come up and they've only got 50,000 plants per hectare, they're going to lose money. They're not going to make money out of that crop because the density of plants is too low for them to do that. And so it costs money, of course, to buy seed every year, but it's an investment in getting a good crop, because with that buying of seed comes insurance that if for example, you plant the seed and only 50% of it germinates, the company has to actually pay you for your crop losses. That's and I know that I'm not sure about Portugal, but I'm pretty sure throughout most of the European Union, those are the rules. There are seed quality rules, and so because of that, there's a level of trust and planning that you can have when you grow your crop. Of course, there are some areas of traditional agriculture where people do keep the seed, and that's fine too, but it usually means that those areas are areas where they know that they can get good seed quality.
What are the professor's thoughts on the lack of labeling of genetic modified organisms in some countries?
Yeah, so In Australia at the moment, you don't need to label something that's got GM. There are some companies who label things and say it's GM free, and they're doing that because they say it's GM free. But of course, if you're making almond milk or oat flakes for breakfast or something like that, there's no GM almonds or oats on the market. So in some ways, putting a label on it saying it's GM free is misleading. It's not actually informative. But I think in places like the US, where they have brought in a labeling system, and they're rolling that labeling system out through this year, it's to make a choice whether they think it might be potentially harmful for them or otherwise. I don't have a problem with having a labeling system if that's what people want. I think because people want to be informed about what they're eating, and people want to be able to make choices. Again, I go back to, it doesn't matter whether the choice is rational or non-rational, but they want to be able to make a choice, and this gives them information. You know, you've also got a large percentage of the population who never look at the label. They say, oh, it's tomato. That's all I need to know.
Yeah. What are the biggest challenge and opportunities that the GMO business faces?
Well, the biggest challenge is the cost of regulation, because it's not like when a pharmaceutical company has a new drug, you have certain steps you have to go through. So if you're bringing out a new, like for example, let's say I had a genetically modified barley plant that had higher yield and larger seed. The beer companies, for example, who use that barley to malt to produce beer, they would love that barley, but one of them plus a seed company would probably have to spend around about 30 to 50 million euros to get that transaction. It doesn't cause allergies. It's not environmentally unsafe. In Australia and many parts of Asia and the Americas now, we're all moving to gene-edited crops, because the gene-edited crops don't have that level, because we're only changing one gene in most of those, and we don't have to go through that regulatory system. So that's the challenge, and the opportunity is gene editing will allow us to deliver many of the same outcomes without having to go through so many of those regulatory hurdles.
What are the biggest advantages GMO give us?
So the biggest advantages so far of the ones that are out there, insect resistance is number one. And where that has been most effective has been in crops like cotton and maize. And because we've been able to develop genetically resistant plants to insects, so I can give you some figures, and you'll be able to see these in my book when you get a chance to read it, Maria. But in Australia, the farmers who are growing cotton were spraying for insects every week. So it meant that often a single crop would have 15 to 17 insecticide sprays sprayed onto that crop. And where that became a big problem was because they were on broad acres, the sprays were by aeroplanes. So they'd fly over with a spraying plane and spray. Wind drift would mean it would, go onto people's houses, it would go onto people's washing, it would go onto schools, all of that sort of stuff. It was running off into waterways. It was killing fish. And then as soon as they got the ability to have GMO cotton that had BT in it, which meant they didn't have to spray, not only did the whole farming community within a year or two change over to those new lines, but the community pressure to do so was huge, because it meant that when you haven't got planes flying over every day spraying the cotton, the people who live there, they can go to the pub and have a drink outside. And that was a real thing in a lot of these communities. You didn't go to the pub and sit outside and have a meal or a drink on a nice day, because the chances were sooner or later you're going to get a drift of spray at you. So everyone's inside. And I was actually working up in central Queensland when I was a student, and I went over to the guy I was working for, to his house, and then suddenly his wife ran out and said, "Quick, everyone, get the washing in." And so we all ran out and we got in all the washing and took it inside, and I said, "Is there a storm coming? What is it?" She said, "Oh no, the neighbour just phoned up and said he's going to spray his cotton." And that was life for all of the people living in those sorts of areas. So if you go to any of the cotton growing areas in the world, people love the insect resistant cotton. And that's just one of the examples. I'll give you another example, which is quite, I think, interesting. So the other one that came out at a similar time was the herbicide resistant, and that was in maize and soybean. And pretty much everyone in soybean has now switched over to the herbicide resistance. And the reason they have done that is because it means, again, they were spraying 5 or 6 times for weeds during the cropping cycle. Now they spray once and then they plant. And if some more weeds come up, they can spray once more, and that's it. They spray twice. But where the big benefit of that has come in is because they don't have to then get their tractor and their tillage equipment out and totally lay the field bare to control weeds. They can let the weeds grow. They can leave the crop stubble on there. It's led to a lot of reduction in erosion. So when it rains, you don't get topsoil running off into waterways and things like that. So that's been a really good benefit from the herbicide resistance. However, there is a potential downside to that. And one of the things that has been documented is, because in the United States now, farmers' cornfields and soybean fields are so clean because they've been using herbicide technology like this for 20 years. So there's very few weed populations left. That has actually been, it's great for the farmer, it's great for on-farm productivity, but when it comes to insect populations, because what do the insects eat? Most of the insects are eating the weeds, including the beneficial insects. So that has actually led to a reduction in the population size of insects in many of those places. Not because the herbicide is killing insects, but because the herbicide is killing the insect's food source. And that's a definite ecological outcome, which is a problem in those areas where people just grow the same crops over and over again and use the same herbicides.
And what will be the solution for that? So for example, the sorts of solutions that are coming in places like Argentina and some parts of Canada, there are then rules, and I know this happens in the EU, even though you don't have GM crops much. There are rules about what rotations you can have. So I know, for example, in Germany, every farmer has to have 10% of their land has to be either just allowed to be weeds, or they have to grow plants that are specifically for insects, pollinating insects, those sorts of things. So when you don't have COVID anymore and you have the ability to go somewhere like Germany, you'll see every field has a little plot of something like sunflowers or something like that, or wildflowers, and that's because the government has said 10% of your land must be for insects. And that's starting, they're doing some of the same sort of thing in Canada now. The United States, maybe now that there's going to be a new president who is probably going to be a lot more thinking about the environment compared to the last one, maybe those sorts of things will start to happen in the United States as well. And that would be a good thing.
Yes.
The first example of the pesticides was quite similar to what happened in Bangladesh with the eggplant crops. A lot of the farmers were getting sick, and so they decided to change, and everybody got better.
Yep.
And it also saved a lot of money.
Yep, and because they're getting much higher yields, and and what's happening there is the Indian government said you can't grow these in India until we know that they're safe. Indian farmers are seeing what the Bangladeshi farmers are making money and how safe it is. They're growing them anyway. And that actually happened in the 90s in Brazil. Argentina said we can grow genetically modified soybean. And Brazil said we're going to have a moratorium and we're going to not allow these because we don't know whether they're safe or not. Within 5 years, 2/3 of the Brazilian crop of soybean was GM, but it was illegally GM, and it's because they were buying seed from Argentina and planting it. And the funny part for me was when the Brazilian farmers, when they delivered their crop to the delivery, they had to say what variety of soybean it was. So they all started calling it Maradona because it came from Argentina. And for 3 years in a row, Maradona was the biggest grown cultivar of soybean in Brazil because it was illegal.
Yeah.
And everyone knew what was happening, of course.
What is the next step concerning genetic modified organisms?
Well, I think because of the ability to now do gene editing, we're able to do a lot more things, more quickly, a lot smarter. So, for example, we've been able to do things where we've shown just by altering 2 genes, existing genes, we can get plants that have much higher yield and much larger seed. It's mainly driven by the seed size. And we're going to see those sorts of things happening in a lot of crops. But some of the outcomes that people will see themselves most quickly will be in fruits and vegetables. So there's already a large number of crop varieties that will be coming to market fairly soon that will have health claims. So, for example, they'll have lower GI, meaning you'll have lower glycemic index, so it will be healthier for people. And it won't actually be a GM; it'll be a gene-edited crop. There will be increased number of fruits and vegetables, for example, in different colours. Some of those different colours will come with health claims. It's now easy. So I'll put it this way. We've always known we could have purple, orange, yellow, white, green tomatoes or capsicum or anything like that. But now what we can do is we can take the highest yielding tomato, which is resistant to a lot of diseases, and say, okay, we can change one gene in that tomato and that same tomato will now be orange, or that same tomato will be purple. And we can sell it to people and say, if you eat, you'll have nutritionists saying, if you eat 2 of these purple tomatoes every day, the antioxidants in those tomatoes will mean that you'll live to be 250. Now, we know that's not true, but those will be the sorts of things that will really drive a lot of food innovation in fresh produce over the next few years. And a lot of it will come with health claims, and those health claims will be a little bit, do you understand what I mean when I say dodgy?
I don't know.
Yeah, dodgy is probably not correct, but
Probably
I find
made to counters or support someone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So those will be the sorts of things that'll be happening, but we will also see a large number of things that you won't actually see as being something that something that has been the result of these things. So we know that. So, for example, I'll stick with the tomato example. So, people who process tomatoes to make sauces, ketchup, pastes, their number one enemy is seeds. They want to have tomatoes that don't have seeds. You can't grow tomatoes without a seed. But you can identify two genes where those two genes will, in combination, stop the plant from having seeds. The result of that is you make a hybrid. You have parent with gene A, parent with gene B, you cross them, then the hybrid won't produce any seeds. Who's going to love that? Everyone who makes tomato sauce, tomato ketchup, pizza sauce, everything like that. Because there's no seeds, they can get a tomato which has got a much higher yield of useful weight for them to make those produce. The same thing is going to happen in potatoes. All of the major crops that get processed will have those sorts of things happening because it'll mean companies can save money. And to the consumer, it's invisible. You will never know that this is happening unless, of course, you know people who work on a farm. And then every single known fruit and vegetable can also be made seedless if people want that. So if you want to have water, easy. If you want to have seedless cucumbers, if you want to have seed, anything that's got seeds, you can have it without seeds, as an example. And they're the ones that will drive a lot of innovation because large food companies, they already know, they've already got a calculation. They'll say, if we buy a kilogram of tomatoes, we can turn it into 400 grams of tomato paste. If they don't have seeds, we'll be able to turn it into 600 grams of tomato paste. And we'll charge the same price for that, so we get higher profit. And then the farmer's going to say, well, hang on, if I'm growing this for you and you're going to make extra profit, I want some of that profit. So there has to be profit sharing. And there's much more outside the technical. There is a lot more in the whole, how do we make the value chain work for everyone? Because if the farmer isn't getting extra value out of growing those, why would you grow it? Yeah. If the company doesn't pay you 10 cents more per kilogram, for example, there's no incentive to grow it. So those are the sorts of things that are going on right now in many parts of the world.
Okay. The time of this meeting is almost running out. I'd just like to ask very quickly if the professor thinks that in the future genetic modified organisms will be available all around the world, because like in Portugal we don't have that,
No.
but the professor thinks that one day maybe we'll have.
Yeah, I think it would involve in Europe a big change in government legislation, where the world is going to lead this is where the largest number of people are. So there's 4 billion people living in Asia, yeah. So they're more than half the population of the world. Once they start growing things like golden rice, which has higher vitamin A, Tiago's already given the example of the BT eggplant in Bangladesh. Once those things start to happen in Asia, they're going to keep happening. What will start to become apparent out of that is Asia will be starting to produce very, very large amounts of food, much more cheaply than places like Europe. And that will lead to pressure on European agriculture. European agriculture will have to say, no, we're going to draw a line, we're going to keep agriculture as it is right now, or eventually they're going to have to say, we have to actually start doing this because we're seeing the economic and the environmental benefits, the food security benefits in Asia. It'll start to then happen in Africa. It's already starting to happen in South Africa. Once those sorts of things start to happen, that will lead to people will also start to say things like, how come I can go to Asia and I can get X, Y, and Z, and it's so much better quality, but it's half the price as here. And that's where it becomes a politically driven, where people want it because they feel it's actually going to be better for them from a nutritional and economic point of view.
Yes. Okay. I think this meeting will end really soon. So, I just wanted to thank the professor.
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for asking me all these questions. It's been fantastic. It's really good. If you want to do something again, please let me know if you need any follow-up.
Okay. It's really interesting. Thank you, Professor.
Well, good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.